while we're waiting, I guess I'll just start my introduction and a little
Yeah,
bit of
absolutely.
like an intro. I'll still leave it at this slide. So like I said, I'm Vincent. I'm the sales engineering director for All Secure, which means I'm responsible for conveying the value of our products to prospects and making sure that we're actually adding value as part of the evaluations. But I'm a software engineer by origin, and with years of experience programming enterprise software. And as part of that, I've really picked up a love of test-driven development and quality assurance. And partially that's because as an engineer, I'm not as detail-oriented as I would have wanted. So whenever I would have a 0-1 value, I would always program it the wrong way around. And that's why tests help me out a lot. And previously, I've worked for companies active in automated end-to-end testing for browsers and mobile apps and stuff like that. So I have a lot of sort of experience and exposure to this, like sort of this ecosystem. So I'm not just focused on unit tests or integration tests. I've had a lot of experience with end-to-end tests as well, which is part of the inspiration for this webinar. And I kind of have a love or a passion to find the right level of abstractions to add tests and the right level of maintenance, the effort that lead to confidence that your software or app is really safe to ship. So I've done webinars in the past in different roles that are about some of these testing methodologies as well. So for me, it's a continuation with a bit of a security focus here. So yeah, that's just really setting the stage here. And I guess we can dive in, right, Lakshmiya?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yep. Well, we're going to start with the house rules, which I'll give that over to Lakshmiya just for the next slide. But just so you guys know what you can expect for the rest of the webinar, we're going to talk about the testing pyramid. We're going to talk about what test coverage exactly is, what our system under test and API is going to be, because I took a lot of care to select an API that's actually interesting, not just a dummy API. Different types of tests, unit integration end-to-end. I'm going to do a demonstration, which is always dangerous on a webinar. So you're going to see me sweat and hopefully not fail. And we're going to, like, of course, move to a conclusion and Q&A and all that good stuff. But first, let me hand it over to Lakshmiya to talk about some of the house rules here.
Yes. So for all of our For All Secure webinars, maybe in-house or otherwise, these are our general house rules. Please be respectful and kind to the hosts and participants of this webinar. If you see something that is not kind or respectful, raise your hand, let me know privately, send me a message in the chat, and we'll get that situated. This is a place of just, education and collaboration, and we want to keep it that way. Feel free to send us questions in the chat as they come up. We may hold them off towards the end unless it's something that's just like super pressing, and then we'll be able to, address it at that time. And of course, there's also a raffle. So in order to qualify for the raffle, you must be here from now until the end and not fall under one of the categories of either a government employee or a government contractor. Fortunately, we can't give away prizes to people who are under those entities for extremely obvious reasons. But that's it. That's it for us.
And what's the raffle for? Did we mention that already?
It's a Sonos speaker. Yeah, it's a Sonos speaker.
Nice. Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you for setting the house rules. I'll take it forward then. Cool. So I'm going to set the stage by talking about the test pyramid a little bit. And I've done that in previous webinars, so it's a recurring theme for me. But I really, in context of software testing, like to use the test pyramid and look at the different trade-offs of using tests at a certain level. So a lot of us know unit tests, and that's where a lot of the weight of testing actually happens. So they're very fine-grained. They're running on a granularity that is smaller than running the entire system, which makes them very, very fast. And all the way to the top, we have more end-to-end tests that are focused on having an entire system up and running and it behaving very, very similar as it would in production. There are various trade-offs, and going up the pyramid, I have that listed as bullets, it tends to be more effort to write and maintain the tests, because on the unit level, you have a lot of control of how they're being executed. They're very, flexible in that sense. They're not running how they would use in production, but that has an advantage. They're really fast. So lower on the pyramid, you have a really short feedback loop. And as you go up, the feedback loop becomes longer. As you go up, because there's more components integrated, there tends to be more brittleness and flakiness. In other words, it's harder to write an end-to-end test that works every time, assuming that, of course, the underlying software didn't break. Of course, as you go up the pyramid, and why would you test in a way that has a longer feedback loop, et cetera, it's all about the level of realism. The moment that I'm in that end-to-end spot, I have things up and running in a way that's very similar to how I would run it actually in production. And that is in a way like kind of like the proof of the pudding. Even if you go very, very deep in those unit tests, there's still going to be a possibility at the moment that you deploy the system, there's like a silly bit or a deployment descriptor wrong. And although your unit tests say that your entire system is green, your integration test or end-to-end test might not even start up, right? So that's why Mike Cohn, who is the original author of the test pyramid and Kent Beck programming guru, recommend to you to write tests with different granularity. Why is that? Every type of test covers your system in a different way. The more high level you get, the fewer tests you should have. Otherwise, it would be a testing square, right? Time boxing tests is important in the Apex, and this is a little bit me in my previous roles talking. Like generally, end-to-end tests, they take a long time because they tend to actually interact with the browser or an app and actually automatically verify that everything works as it has to. But you only have so much time to run these end-to-end tests before they start losing value. So the moment that I prepare one of these builds and I have to wait an hour for that entire end-to-end suite to complete, which end-to-end tests are slow, so that can happen, I'm losing value. So it's important in the end-to-end tests that you run, with often, to time box them in. Some companies put it in like 15 minutes. Some companies run it every night and make sure that it fits in however long the night is, let's say 8 to 10 hours. Yeah, which means picking and choosing. So in end-to-end tests, you often focus on what's the most key functionality. What's the stuff that I want to know is not broken before I deploy something automatically. If there is some kind of niche functionality that's broken, you're going to roll forward. It's not going to be the end of the world. At least that's the reasoning behind it. Kent Beck also says, don't unit test trivial code. There's a lot of people in test-driven development, which I'm great adept of, that try to focus to get to 100% coverage. At one point, that wastes your time writing those tests. And as it always is the case with software, it's not just about writing the test that wastes time, it's maintaining them as well. So if I'm going to create code to test getters and setters, that's kind of like a waste of my time. I would like to add to that, but do cover them somewhere else, right? It might be a silly getter and setter, and I don't want to write a unit test for it, but it is really nice if it's covered in some way, shape, or form in integration or end-to-end, because the code is there and it has some value, right? But you do not want to spend a lot of time maintaining that. It needs to be like an almost free test, something that you just get as a result of running an integration test without specifically targeting that code. All right. What is test coverage? I just asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT came up with a pretty good description. So I just copy pasted it. I liked it. Test coverage refers to the extent to which a software application is tested by a set of test cases. It measures the effectiveness of testing by identifying the percentage of code or functionality that is exercised during testing. Test coverage helps ensure that all parts of an application are tested, reducing the risk of defects and improving software quality. So where does that all boil down to? It's simply a technique to see when I run a test suite, be it unit test, integration test, or end-to-end tests, to see, okay, these tests which pieces of code did they actually touch? Did they touch it 1 time, 2 times? What is my general like sort of stream, as in it goes 50% of the times that I invoke the code goes left, 50% it goes right. So that gives me an indication how many test scenarios I have, and if my code is ever even used. So this is also a way that you can find unused code. For example, if you have parts of code in your system that there's just no way for you to like reach that code block, it's probably not really being used anymore. So by seeing that, you can reason about what did I test, what didn't I test? The goal not being to get to 100%, but to get insight on what I actually tested, and if the things that I didn't cover in my test, if that's okay that they're not covered, or how I could cover that in a different test. But the key here, in my opinion, is these different test types need to work together. Our system or API under test is Mattermost. So it's an open source platform for secure collaboration across the SDLC, aka a Slack clone. It's open source. We for All Secure have no affiliation with Mattermost. It's just an open source API that is fairly complicated. So it's a real product, and it's hosted on GitHub, so everybody can take a look. And we use that to be the target of looking at the different types of tests they have, because I am actually pleased to see the amount of tests that they have. So we're first going to quickly touch on unit test coverage. This is not a webinar that focuses too much on what unit tests are. So I kind of hope that most of the people that are participating have sort of an idea of what unit tests are. But I have an example on the bottom left of a unit test for a piece of functionality that I arbitrarily selected from that Mattermost server, specifically the functionality to restore a channel. So if you've deleted a channel, to restore it. I'm not saying that is particularly the most important functionality, but generally what you see is it's an API in Go, and that's also intentional. More about that later. A unit test you generally write in the same language as the production code. So that means that your integration is nice and tight. And you can use your skills that you have writing the code itself to write the tests as well. It tends to be pretty, it's not very verbose, as in you can write a test that does a lot with little code. And when I run that, this is a functionality that Go has, but all the languages that you could program in, like Python, Java, et cetera, can do that as well. It can give you an indication as I run all of my tests, what is the code that's being covered and what's the code that's not being covered. So in this case, and it's very subtle because it's a gradient, right? If it's gray, it's covered very low. And if it's bright green, it's covered very high. But if I really look through this code, I see that there's a fork here where 100% of the code that ran these tests went through this entire part. And then there's an if there. 50% of the test code went into the direction, hey, there's a permission error, and the rest went on to execute the rest of the method. So this gives me an indication what my tests specifically are doing in order to verify that my functionality works. I do that see that some parts are red, and in this case, my opinion is that the developer did a bang up job, because these are typical error handling code that would be like tedious to test. It's probably all over the code, and there's a very low risk of something going wrong. So if you would have to write specific tests for that, there are additional tests, you have to maintain them, et cetera. So I really agree with how this method is covered. By the way, I didn't explicitly mention it, but like this is the production code. This is the test code. So this code actually tests the production code here. The only thing what happens here is that it annotated with a color, which is an indication of how it's covered by these tests. Cool. Let's take a look at the end-to-end coverage. So end-to-end tests are generally mostly positive test cases. So you're not doing like all these corner cases and seeing if it breaks. And in this case, we see that by the fact that our restore channel functionality that we're looking at for the purposes of this webinar is not covered at all. which is not bad because it's probably not core functionality of my application. The moment that I ship a version of my Mattermost client or server and restoring of channels doesn't work, that's probably not the end of the world because people can do the most of the things. So this makes sense. I want to quickly take a look as well, partially because I just think that Cypress is cool. How a Cypress test run looks. So what Cypress does is actually originate the tests all the way from the browser. So you do see some like identifiers that kind of give it away that you're in a browser. And you can see that this script is really interacting with the browser like it is a user. And just because I think it looks cool, I would quickly want to show how running a test like that runs. Doesn't really particularly have that much to do with this webinar, but I think Cypress is cool, and I think seeing something like this is cool. So I'm running it in headed mode, and what it basically just does is on the left-hand side, it goes through my test specification, and I have a view of my application, and this can be in many different browsers. That's the cool thing about it. And it is actually just automatically running these tests for me. And even if I would want to, I can still interact with the app. So this is the way that all of these tests go through, and it just verifies if I do a certain thing, does my UI get updated in the right way? And of course, because I'm using the UI and I'm using it to do all kinds of like chat messages and stuff like that, that hits my API as well. So we'll leave that be. Stop this run and go back to the presentation. Cool. So what I wanted to highlight here, and you saw it a little bit already, like this takes long to run because you actually have to, there's a web page that needs to be built up. You're filling in different fields. So these are tests that take some time to run for sure. And it's also kind of hard to maintain. The moment that I change something in my HTML code, I have to make sure that my script still works. So this tends to be like one of these things. I want to have my core functionality tested here. That's really, really important. But I don't really want to get like exhaustive about it. So the coverage of my end-to-end tests are probably going to be a little bit on the lower side, which of course this is an indication of. So far, I'm still really agreeing with the decisions that the Mattermost team made for their tests. Let's keep going. I would want to talk about Mayhem. Mayhem is the product of For All Secure company that I work for. It's basically machine learning driven integration testing. So in that testing period, it falls testing pyramid. It falls really in the middle. It's a little bit has a flavor of end-to-end, but majority of it I would say is integration testing. And contrary to what we saw in the end-to-end tests, which also interact with the browser, what Mayhem does, the API product at least, is it just integrates with the API, so it tests API. We can start with a Postman collection, a Swagger, or an open API, which documents what my API does. So that's the spec. And based on that, what Mayhem does is using self-learning creates a bunch of tests. And it doesn't just do that statically up front. It takes into account the responses that it gets from the server as well. So every result generates new condition inputs and tests. And under the hood, what we use is fuzzing. So it's coverage guided heuristics that uses instrumentation to generate new tests. So in other words, based on the response of the server, we keep searching for different avenues to hit different paths in the code. What that all ends up in is an automated triage process and regression testing as well. So triage being is like we deduplicate it. We verify if this is something that we've seen in the past, right? And the regression test is very important to maintain because the moment that I rerun a test set, I can just immediately start with running my regression tests first. So I have very super fast feedback. For example, if I'm creating a pull request, if I introduced any regressions, but more about that later. I have a slide for that. So that's really the technology what's going on under the hood and the product that I'm going to show you a tiny bit of a demo of. You want to dive a little bit more deeper under the hood to underline what the difference is between Mayhem and a lot of different products out there that are doing pen testing, because Mayhem is an offensive security product. So it's kind of like being a hacker, but instead of a human brain having to think about how to get into an API, all of that knowledge is encoded in the product itself. What's a little bit different compared to other pen testing products is what we really focus on is the moment that we get a successful response to an HTTP 200. So we have a message that actually works. What we do is we keep digging. We keep digging and changing that method or message, the request, little by little, because under the hood, we know that we're executing, or there's a chance at least of executing new code paths. Other products, often the moment that they get a successful result, like an HTTP 200, they go and try something else until they break it. But we keep like sort of like freestyling of that 200, and we keep like tuning that message a little bit based on responses of the server until we actually find a bug. So it's a little bit more, a little bit different of an approach that is in certain situations a lot more effective. So let's go into the demo. I'm going to quickly walk you through the different steps that I'm going to go through. So first of all, I want to talk about new Go 1.20 functionality. So this has been released in February, I believe, and it's partially inspiration for me choosing a Go API to do this webinar with. Because in the past, you could use Go to collect coverage for like unit tests and stuff like that. But on a running application, it was a little bit more complicated. Right now, that's part of the core language. So all that I need to do, and that's all the way to the top, is set a specific flag when I run my Go program and an environment variable pointing to a directory where coverage data is written. We see make test data as the second part of the command. This just has something to do with how the Mattermost service is started up. So this could be a different command if it is for your particular product, right? But the key part is the beginning. All I have to do is set that cover flag, point it to a directory where it can write these coverage data files. And then I will have my server started up. The second command is actually Mayhem for API. The utility is called Mappy. I didn't include in my demo examples as how to download it, but it's very simple, and I will include it in the last slide, a call to action on how to do that. But what I'm instructing it is to do a run. This is just simply the name of the target that I'm running it towards. For intents of the webinar, I'm just doing a minute because I don't want to make you guys wait too long. A spec to the a reference to the Open API spec that describes what this API is and does. I'm pointing to where the API is running. In this case, it's on my local machine once I've run this command, and I already did. You know, we don't want to spend the webinar waiting for the server to come up. And in this case, for webinar as well, I focused on a particular number of endpoints because this product, of course, has, you know, a lot of endpoints. And so what I focused on is a specific subsection of that around creating and updating channels and searching for channels. So think about Slack channels. I have to include authorization as well. So in this case, I'm logging in with a certain user. So in my local environment, I have a personal access token for that user. And a resource hint is something that has a little bit with Mayhem for API to do, so that it's like a hint. If it needs a channel at first to experiment with, this is an ID that's valid. The cool thing about Mayhem for API is the moment that it starts interacting with get, post, put, delete, you know, just basically CRUD operations, it knows what REST resources are. So it knows if it creates one, it keeps a reference to that and then tries to update and delete it. So it is stateful like that. Finally, I give it a flag to run interactively so we can see what's going on. Then, and actually during the webinar, I won't actually go through this. I did that beforehand. So it's mainly going to be about this. But in order to get that coverage, what I would do, I would have to stop the server, signaling to write all coverage data to files. It just has something to do with that coverage functionality for Go. And then convert it into a certain format, right? Generally, I convert it first to the Curvatura text format, and you can use that to upload to codeconf.io, for example, one of the online tools out there to visualize your code coverage. Nothing to do with For All Secure, just cool product to use. And then convert it to HTML as well, which the other screenshots that I've shown as part of the presentations were those HTMLs generated by that. All right, cool. Without further ado, let's try to see me not fail. What I already did here is run that command. So that server is up and running right now. So I made that easy. Even to appease the demo gods, I did a run just before the webinar started. If everything would go up in flames, then at least I have a job to show you guys. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to exit out of this run that I did. And in my history, I just have the exact same command that I had in that presentation. I'm going to run that. And what's going to happen is it's going to interact with my API and send a lot of requests there. So initially, I see that I'm getting a lot of 401s. So it's not getting successful coverage. So what we're going to do for that is actually take a look at the API where it's running. Oh, sorry. System console, integration management. I'm going to enable the personal access tokens here and save it. And the moment I do that, what I will see is that the 200 suddenly surge upwards. So I see in this case, if I enable personal access tokens, my token kicks in, and I am able to get successful coverage of these different endpoints. So that's generally a good indication to for you to understand that Mayhem for API is doing what it needs to do. If everything is in 401, means it's not being able to authorize against your API, and you're not going to get a lot of feedback from it. So we chose to run it for a minute, so it's done now. And I already see that there's a couple of interesting things that happened. I've got a couple of 500s. I've got a bunch of 404s, that's probably fine, and a couple of other interesting additional pieces of information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of the interactive mode now. It gives me a dump of everything that it found, but it also gives me a results URL that I can go to. So if I switch to my browser and I refresh this overview, could paste it in the link as well, but right now I'm at the cloud environment for the API product. So all the results get uploaded to our cloud environment so that I can see them in context. So this one is completed a minute ago. That's the one that we started. I immediately do want to say for people that are working for an organization that would like to keep their results private, not upload that to our cloud environment, Mayhem for API can be ran in offline mode as well. So what we export and for integration in CI/CD, we use standardized reports such as JUnit reports and Serif reports and stuff like that. So you don't have to use this overview if your organization wants to keep their security information private. Do want to mention that. Wonderful. So what we're seeing is a couple of things that it found. So in this case, whenever Mayhem for API finds a problem, it's partially based on the fact that something is not according to how the API specifies that it needs to be. A 500 is never really something that you want an API to return, because it's indicative that like something during processing actually went wrong. So in this case, we see that Mayhem for API tried to inject some code in there to try to get access to Etsy password. So a file on the file system that it's not supposed to have access to, and trying to leverage the fact that there is this is being passed to a database, and it's trying to find also SQL injection. So I do see that PQ here, that's Postgres, that it was able to escape out of a SQL query and actually be able to see that Postgres replied to it in not a way that we really expected. I did do the research, of course, and I did verify that in this case, it's not an actual problem for it's a problem in such a sense that it can't really be used to actually execute a SQL injection. So from that perspective, it's not as critical, but it's still an interesting piece of information to receive. So of course, as part of this webinar, I wouldn't really want to expose severe security vulnerabilities here. For the rest, helping developers remediate, there's links to the CWEs and stuff like that. So that's just a short overview of how we actually find problems. Other warnings refer to problems in the spec. But this webinar is partially I want to touch on what this product does. and how it hits your endpoints, how it finds potential problems, tells you about internal server errors, SQL injection, command injection, path reversals, and things like that. Shows your latency. But we're really at in the scope of this webinar talking about coverage. We are, of course, also interested. A job like this, right now I'm running it for a minute. Jobs like this are supposed to run for a lot longer, right? And what is very important to note, and I'll drop back in the presentation here, is that the coverage that I receive, the coverage that I get, I don't have to write any tests for that. Everything is generated for me. Of course, what Mayhem for API doesn't do, it doesn't verify that if my responses are correct from a functional perspective, right? Like it doesn't verify if I create my channel, if the channel is created exactly correctly how I expect it to be. It's like a lower level of abstraction. So it more focuses on if I throw in input that is not expected, how does my API react to it? So in this case, you can refer that as negative test cases because it tries to break it, right? But as a side effect of trying to break it, we do get more coverage. We see, for example, that error handlers in this case, and that makes sense because that's what Mayhem for API does, throws in an error or wrong information, which causes us to dive into these branches that weren't tested during the end-to-end test or the unit test. We also see something the other way around. So this was tested in unit test, but not tested here. And that's because I'm just testing it with one user. So that user is an admin, has access to everything. We also see that there's some code that still isn't covered yet. And this is an esoteric example where something in the database or a channel got written in the database that's not able to be converted to valid JSON. And that's really unexpected. So it's a good example of something that probably if I run this fuzzing job for like an hour, 3 hours, 10 hours, there is a fair chance that I will hit this code as well, because eventually Mayhem for API will inject a channel that cannot be correctly marshaled back to JSON. So that's a good thing to, the moment that I see that, to think about, hey, how would I want to cover that? Some of the points here as well is the runtime is less than the end-to-end tests. I mean, I didn't show you both runs side to side, but running all the end-to-end tests took like over now close to 2 hours, right? Getting this level of coverage, a lot less. But of course, there's a difference because these are negative test cases where end-to-end is really focused on positive. So I'm not saying that don't do end-to-end tests. That is the wrong takeaway. Use this in addition to. The advantage here is that there's no code or test suites to maintain. If we want to combine all this coverage, we can, right? This is the report from unit, from end-to-end, and from the Mayhem run. And I can do that by, for example, as part of my CI/CD pipeline, uploading it to CodeConf. Of course, I already did that. If my Zoom thing wants to get out of the way. So what we see here is the combination of basically all these different, if I would go to the right, this is the one, restore channel. So I see if I combine the coverage information from all these 3 different runs, I see that everything is covered, everything is green. This was covered in unit test, this was covered in the Mayhem run. And we see that one piece where things aren't covered. So the moment that I would run Mayhem for API longer, there's a fair chance that something would actually reach this code, right? And it's really great if I've combined the coverage of all these different runs, because if I then see what's being covered by the different testing type, I could go ahead and like sort of reason about, hey, is this the fact that this code is not covered? Where do I want to cover my risk? In this case, my answer would probably just be run the fuzzer longer because it's going to get to that piece of code eventually. But once in a blue moon, I might find code where I'm like, hey, this is actually something that, considering everything, I would want to do in my end-to-end test because it's important. Or it's cheaper to do in a unit test, so let's just do it there because, you know, it doesn't add too much of a coverage maintenance overhead. So did want to mention as well, as part of this exercise going through the API, I did find more severe error where there is an HTTP server panic, which means that the thread that's serving my payload actually crashed. And that led to me actually filing a bug at Mattermost. They were not super impressed with this finding. They said that they knew about it, but still we had some results come out of that. Yeah, cool. I do want to talk about quickly, and let me do a check on time. Okay, I'm good on time. I've talked mainly about running these jobs as sort of one-offs from the command line, like I just did that. But what if I actually want to embed that into my development pipeline? So I'm not going to go through a full demo for that, although like one of the things towards the end of the presentation, we'll have my contact information, and I'm more than happy to give more depth information on that. But why is Mayhem made for such a way that it really helps you shifting left things that normally from a security perspective happen more towards the right? So generally when you're doing security kind of tests, pen tests, it's either in the test phase or mostly in the release phase, which is also where we recommend you guys to run Mayhem. But there's a very, very large added benefit. Is anything that's found during that continuous testing is stored in a regression set. That regression set is stored in our cloud environment. And it means if, as a developer, I am actually creating a pull request and I'm running, I'm pushing code to that, and my pipelines run as automatically as part of that. So think of GitHub Actions or Jenkins or GitLab, the pipelines that compile and test your code. It's very easy to run Mayhem as part of that as well. And the advantage of that is that it runs really, really fast, because these regression sets, they usually only take a couple of seconds, maybe a minute to run. So this can be a very effective way for preventing that sensitive code enters my development stream. The other advantage is just a lot less overhead administratively, because if I'm a developer, something alerts me that I have a problem in my code, I can just fix it. I don't have to file a Jira ticket. I don't have to, go through an Excel spreadsheet and pass that back to my security person or something like that. So it just is a lot easier for developers to do it at that early stage. At the same time, all the information of these runs, of course, is persisted. So from a security perspective, you still have that paper trail if you would want that. So I did want to call that out about Mayhem in CI/CD, and we have good examples of how to do that in GitHub in any CI server. So I think that's rather unique for a product in this space. So I did want to call that out. So I want to move towards the conclusion. So what I've tried to expose to or explain to you, my point of view, is that test coverage helps you to see how code is covered by these different test types. So I really wanted to hone in on throwing all the coverage information together is valuable, but looking at it independently is very helpful. It gives you a lot of insights on what's being tested, and that of course affects your confidence. Testing positively and negatively both is essential, right? Testing positively in the sense of like testing that the application does what you want it to do, what your employer is paying you to do, is super essential. But writing negative tests is also important, but it's like kind of a pain in the neck to write these tests, which is why you would want something as Mayhem for API to generate that stuff for you, so you don't have to concern yourself that much about thinking about all these boundary and corner cases and stuff like that. So different approaches make sense for different test types, and you need different test types to do different things. So see it as different tools in your tool belt. Something that's really easy to do in integration might be hard in unit, and the other way around. Same goes for end-to-end. There's different trade-offs. So use them all. Mayhem in this test pyramid allows you to run high coverage, low effort negative tests. So low effort from the perspective of maintenance and throughput generally as well. High test coverage derived from multiple test types gives you more confidence in your code, is what I like, the conclusion that I would want to finish out with. So at this point, I would really love to answer some questions, and let me stop my screen share. That allows me yeah, maybe Lakshmi, maybe you can help me see what was asked and what I can answer.
Yeah, of course. So this question was kind of addressed already, but I think we can actually use this for later.
Okay.
Someone asked, are we going to cover how to use the dashboard and how to set up Venv and Docker? I think that's an idea for another webinar, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm trying to see. Okay, I can't see. But anyways, I wanted to use the name of the person who asked the question, but I don't know it. So
Ankar.
Ankar. Okay. Well, thanks for asking that question. Do feel free at the last slide. I have my contact information, so feel free to hit me up. Of course, there's only a certain amount of stuff that I could fit in that webinar, but I'm happy to expose some of like the other material that shows you how to get set up on all of this. And the very short summary is, if it comes to like the dashboard, like our dashboard for Mayhem for API. And the last slide, I have a sign up link for that. And that's really all that's necessary. Then you can log in with your GitHub, your Google, or whatever.
Mhm.
Yep.
And Emmanuel asked if you were using Golang as the language.
Yes, this was indeed, this was Go, correct. And again, to re-highlight that the reason that I chose Go, because Go just released that 1.20 version, this cool new functionality that you can get coverage information out of a running process, which is new for Go.
Okay. And Neil is asking, is there a way to specify the API system architecture, for example, Linux, Windows, type of backend, DB, to tailor fuzz testing cases?
You know, that's a great question. At this point, that is not the case. So Mayhem for API treats any backend architecture in the same way. There is a good point to what you're saying. For example, if I know that it's a Java backend, I know that it marshals JSON in a specific way. For example, there are plugins that can be written for that, where you can massage what our generators do by default. But right now, it's not a baked-in feature where you can say, "Hey, this is Python on Linux," and inject some stuff specifically for Python on Linux. So all the things for Linux, for Windows, and the different languages are all kind of like baked in. So you will, for example, see, even if you're running on Windows, we will try to do path traversals using Linux-style paths and Windows-style paths. So we will try both. Of course, it could be more efficient to just tell, hey, we're running on Linux, so don't try all the Windows stuff. But right now, it's not a flag that's available. A great question, and thank you for that.
Right. And Rebecca asked 2 questions. The first question is, do you support gRPC or GraphQL?
We do gRPC through a proxy, and GraphQL, we have basic support. I'll be completely honest with you. Like, the product right now is tuned for REST APIs. So we do have some success with GraphQLs, but we are expanding our generators to be more specific for GraphQL. So there's a lot more power that is coming in the future for GraphQL.
Very true. And how is this product licensed?
It's a good point. Yeah, like, I haven't really talked about that at all. And let's see, I'm thinking, do I want to switch to the last slide? I'll just quickly do my screen share again and show you the last slide. So I have, there we go. So how is it licensed? So first of all, we have a freemium version. That's why I wanted to pull this slide up. You can get that at the URL that you see there. The freemium version has everything that the enterprise version has, except it's limited in the amount of runs you can do per month. But it's unlimited users, et cetera, all the features that you would get otherwise. So the moment that you go for an enterprise license, the product is licensed per contributing developer. So this is not someone accessing our cloud environment. It's, in summary, that the easiest way to summarize it is someone actually committing to the repository that you're scanning. So really, you're a developer, not your security people, not people not actively writing code. Yep.
That's the best way to explain that. And the last question I have so far is from Michelle. She asks, what kind of problems does Mayhem actually find?
Yeah, great question. So some of the things that it finds are cross-site server or cross-site request forgery, path reversal, command injection, SQL injection, problems with the specs. So if requests or responses are not valid according to the spec, so what Mayhem for API does is it tries to send in some requests that technically, according to the API documentation, are not valid. So it's going to try to get to see how the API responds to that. In addition to that, like server crashes, that's the one that I found in context of when I was preparing this webinar. Internal server errors, obviously, and I'm sure I've missed one or two. This is documented on our website. It's under the rules for Mayhem for API. So in the follow-up for this webinar, I'm sure we're doing a follow-up to everyone who attended. I will make sure that I include a link to the exact rules that we check for.
Perfect. And Omkar, we have a couple more questions. So Omkar asks, does Mayhem use machine learning as it continues testing, or is everything pre-coded?
So it does use a learning algorithm. So it's not fully pre-programmed in the sense of a heuristic. So it learns based on the responses that the server gives you. But it is based on generators, right? So it is a combination of machine learning and heuristics, if you get technical about it.
Sounds good. And Sherwin asks, can you talk about what kind of debugging info is available within Mayhem to resolve issues? Ideally, avoiding bouncing between multiple systems for relevant info to debug.
Yes, I can. Also, Sherwin, good to see you. I know Sherwin, so I'm happy
cool.
to see I'm asking a question. Yeah. So the kind of info that is available in Mayhem, and I can actually show you that, makes it a little bit more clear. So it's really right now focused on what Mayhem is sending. So this is the payload that actually triggered the exploit that I can always copy, paste, and reproduce. So I can, anything that Mayhem finds, I can get a curl command, I can copy that, run it, and execute it. The response that I get back is what, or what's listed here, is what the server gave back. In some situations, the servers give like a backtrace or a trace back as well. In case we get that, that's listed here. We can integrate with crash collectors, so such as backtrace or Sentry. Those are generally integrated into your API product. So every error that it's getting under the hood is being sent to backtrace or to Sentry. Because with every request that we send, we record a unique UUID. You can always go to Sentry or backtrace or another product like that and find what the exact information was associated with that. And those products tend to be a lot more expansive in getting debugging information. And this is something that we have integration with this as well. So in some situations, we can, in enterprise setups, we can even create a link between a crash collector and Mayhem for API, so that for those problems that we find suspect, where we want more details, that we can reach out to a Sentry and backtrace, pull in more debugging information, because we're running kind of black box, right? We're running outside of the API. So we do rely on crash collectors and error collectors like that to get the really detailed information. So great question. Thanks, Sherwin.
So there were a couple other questions that were anonymous, but I can actually answer them. So someone asked if they can access the slides after the webinar. Not necessarily the slides, but we are going to send out a recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. So you'll be able to, look at this on demand and, pause it, slow it down, speed it up, whatever you want to do with that. And if you're ever late to a For All Secure webinar, you'll still be able to access the recording as well. So if you missed something in the beginning, you'll be able to go back to it and listen, watch, whatever you want to do. We'll make sure you get as much information as you possibly can.
Wonderful. Cool. Did want to quickly mention, I don't know if there's more question, but then I can stop my screen share. If anyone has any questions, you can find me on Twitter or GitHub. via Luxembourg, or we have a public Slack as well. So anyone can sign up to this Slack instance. So you can find me on there or on LinkedIn, any way that you please. And I do want to highlight this URL again, where you can get Mayhem for the Mayhem for API freemium version. It's really, really quick to get up and running. So that would be a really, really nice follow-up question if you guys could try that out and let me know.
Yeah, for sure. And if you guys want to reach out to me, I'm Lashmia Ferber on LinkedIn. I'm the only person that pops up. So feel free to connect with me on there as well. If you have any other product questions as well, I can happily answer them, or even in the public Slack channel, same name. I am very happy that you guys attended today. The email follow-up will have, of course, the recording to the webinar and who won the Sonos speaker, because we got to verify a couple of things. I appreciate y'all coming, participating, and actually being here with us. Like, this is our first instance of Webinar Wednesday, but definitely not the last one. And I'm so happy to see you guys. And also, don't be afraid to put a little mayhem in your pipeline, okay? And so if that's it from us, I'll give y'all some more time back in your day. Have a good one, y'all.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys popping in.